glad to be here with you all tonight, and I want to preface by saying some of the things that we're going to discuss are extraordinarily challenging and traumatizing. So I just want to preface with two things. The first being, after this, when we look this deep into the darkness, it's really important that we remember that we know the light of the world, and that we are in prayer, that we're in self-care, that we're doing things to take care of ourselves. Because we're looking at the devil's work in this world. So I just want to preface and prepare with that. And this may, if you're like me, when I first heard this, I've been a counselor for 10 years, and I thought I saw everything under the sun, because I was working with people that were in state, federal prison, people that were in local prison, people with addictions, people with trauma of all kinds, and I didn't think you could shake me. And I went to this training, and this shook my foundations to the floor. And I realized, and this may happen to some of you, I realized it was like the end of the movie Sixth Sense, where I looked back at the past 10, 15 years of my life, counseling and prior, and I realized I knew people who were trafficked. I just didn't know what I was seeing. I didn't have eyes to see it. And I tried to help them in the way that I knew how to help people, but I missed it. And they left me without this issue, the most profound existential trauma in their lives, being seen or addressed. So you may have some things come up from hearing this material, and that's okay. Two things. One, I'm happy to come back here for a follow-up. I'm also happy to communicate through Pastor Barry if any of you have any follow-up questions. And this PowerPoint is yours. Print it and put it in every bathroom you go to. I don't care. I just want to get this information out. So with that in mind, we're going to begin our training. And the first thing is, how do you define human trafficking? You know, in my mind, my paradigm was, this is something that happens with foreign nationals that are brought into this country in some kind of secret boat and then shuttled around in some kind of, vans or trucks. And that's this issue. And it doesn't really touch my life. I think people now, some of the talk and some of the things that happened with Jeffrey Epstein, Max Wayne, his compatriot getting arrested, is that people are talking about this in the higher echelons of society. They're talking about celebrities. They're talking about politicians engaging in human trafficking. That's good that it's bringing awareness, but it's not bringing awareness in the right place. I will never meet Tom Hanks. It ain't going to happen. But this is happening in this area, in stores you pass, in apartments that you drive by every day. It's here. So it's great that we're talking about what happened with Epstein's Island. That needs to happen. It needs to come into the light of exposure and be dealt with. But we need to realize there's something tangible we can do right here. Because it's here. It's not segmented off to a section of society. It permeates Lehigh County, it's here. Northampton County, it's there. And we're going to talk a little bit about how you can see it. But to define it, it's any sexual exploitation of a minor, period. There is no such thing. Everybody repeat with me. There is no such thing.
There is no such thing
as a child prostitute.
As a child prostitute.
Children cannot make a conscious decision to sell themselves for sex.
Amen.
They're a child. So whatever happened to them happened because someone exploited them. Someone took advantage of them. And police, law enforcement, counselors, when I got into this field, they looked at the person as a problem, even though they were a kid. Those eyes have changed, thankfully. Not everywhere. They need to change with us. There is no such thing as a child prostitute. And there are children in this area. Someone inclined to have a child perform sexual acts with them can have someone to their house in roughly the same amount of time it takes you to order pizza. Right here. That's the reality. Any situation where force, coercion, or manipulation is involved, bait and switch is involved. So another example of human trafficking is someone wants drugs. Is that a good motivation? No. But someone wants drugs, and then all of a sudden they realize that if they don't produce money for someone sexually, they're at risk of being killed. Their families are at risk. They're being blackmailed. That videos, pictures of them being forcibly assaulted or performing sex acts for drugs will be distributed to everyone they know or care about. There's recently a woman who killed herself. You can Google search this. I wanted to add this to this video and I just didn't have time to this PowerPoint grab. She was online and she opted to enter a chat room that was a sexual chat. And she ended up having a sexual interaction with a man via the internet. He recorded it and then told her, I will distribute this. Everyone you know will know this, unless you do X, Y, and Z. Force, manipulation, coercion. He was trafficking her for pornography. She ended up killing herself. These are all different ways human trafficking manifests itself. So my paradigm of this is girls from Taiwan that come here. Is that a thing? Yes. This is happening on the internet in Bethlehem. This is happening to people using drugs in Easton. We're going to talk more about it. We need to contextualize this into the other areas that it exists in. So, force, manipulation, coercion, that is the definition. Pimp domination, we're going to talk about later. But anytime somebody is under control, and we're going to talk about how systemic this control is, that is human trafficking. And it's pervasive. These are some of the numbers, and I apologize, I'm old, so I got to get closer. Fine. So, 40 million are trafficked in 2017. 25 million are victims of forced labor, 4.8 million sexual exploitation. One thing that I want to talk about with this, these numbers are hugely skewed for two reasons. These are the people that made it to the definition of human trafficking. And there are a couple silos that come in before you get to that number. The first silo is, how many people aren't found? How many people are never out? Never make it to law enforcement, never make it to a counselor, never make it to a pastor. How many people that make it there get viewed as a victim? A huge number are not. They're viewed as somebody who made a moral decision. And while I freely admit there is probably, I have not worked with them, but in my entire life, but there's probably a person out there, I'll acquiesce, that made a decision to monetize their bodies. The vast majority of that is not their story. The average age that somebody enters into human trafficking or prostitution is 12 years old in the continental United States. We are not talking about Eastern Europe. Here, 12 years old. And prior to that, oftentimes you see the person was sexually abused in the context of their homes, in the context of foster care, prior to ever entering into the commercial sex trade. So we're talking about 12 years old, likely with trauma before that. So when we encounter somebody, which I have, the organization Aspire to Autonomy, which is a local organization that just opened up a safe house for women that are rescued, that are brought out of trafficking situations. They're seeing people that are in their 40s, in their 30s, in their 20s, in their 60s that are still living out their abuse. It started when they were 12. It started when they were 10. So is this a person making a decision, or is this a horribly traumatized person that's been under a spirit of abuse their whole lives? And what do we as individuals and as the church do to set the captives free? How do we engage that? Oftentimes, and I'm not saying this church, and I'm not saying any of the people here, but the institutional church hasn't brought Christ to them. The Gospels do, the Bible does. How do we? This is a map of the human trafficking hotspots throughout the country. Now check us out. We're in the thick. The areas where you don't see a lot of light, I would argue, this is my argument from opinion, I'll own that. It's because it hasn't been uncovered. It's because, for whatever reason, their states, their systems haven't engaged in there enough to find it yet. But we're in the hotbed. We're absolutely in the hotbed, and there's a circuit. And we're going to talk about how the circuit works. But the circuit works, and I want to talk a little bit about how, I might be getting ahead of myself, but I think this is a good time to say this. The circuit doesn't work like someone is kidnapped all the time. It works like that sometimes. But often what you see is a 13-year-old, 14-year-old person, boy or girl, goes to a party. And they think they're doing a fun thing on a Friday night, and they're being a little dangerous with the rules. They're kidnapped for a weekend, and they're sexually assaulted, and they're threatened, and they have the ever-loving ex scared out. Then they're sent home. And what they're told is, here's a secret cell phone, or here's a secret email. When you hear from me, you go exactly where I tell you to go. And when a Comic-Con comes to town, when a Super Bowl, when the convention of haberdasheries comes to the area, you're going to come, you're going to work that. And you see a pattern of runaway behavior. But the parents don't know what to make of it. They're encouraging. You know, if you see 3 to 4 runaway scenarios in a kid's life, that's a flag. Because the way this system works is they're embedded. They don't have to worry about law enforcement that much. They don't have to worry about feeding you. They don't have to worry about handling your housing. They use you for a weekend. And you're told, as a 13, 14-year-old boy or girl, if you ever don't respond or if you ever tell anyone, I have recordings of you, they'll be disseminated. You want your school to know that, your parents to know that. You have a younger sibling. Do you want me to make money off them? You want me to hurt them? If not, you need to listen. And from free trafficking victims, these are the stories we're hearing. We're also hearing stories of people who got pregnant, showed back up to home 6 months later. They walked around pregnant for 3 months, then disappeared, come back with no baby. The baby's being cut. That has happened. Or the baby's being threatened. That has happened. So these are some of the situations. We are in the middle of a circuit. The tri-state area that we are in, there is such dense population. And there are so many things, like the situations I mentioned, that happen, so many events, so many hotels, that these kids are just moved from spot to spot. They're on call. Majority of reported trafficking cases in the U.S. are documented United States citizens, born and raised, not from a different jurisdiction, not from a different state. They're from here. They're under the age of 18, 12 years old is average, and they are on average Caucasian. Now, there are two reasons I believe that these numbers are skewed in the way that they are. One is because it is true that there are different price points for different kinds of trafficking victims. And a Caucasian trafficking victim that's under the age going down in age. These are business people that look at them as a higher ticket person. I hate to talk about human beings that way, but they look at it from a monetization standpoint, and that draws them more money. Now, we believe that there are more African American and Latino traffic victims. And it's kind of something that law enforcement and the FBI, every FBI jurisdiction has a trafficking person. And they say they see the outline of it, they just haven't pierced it. Some of that is because there's less awareness. There's less cohesion within the communities. And some of it's because, again, a lot of these kids end up being looked at as kids with moral failures, kids with problems. And the agencies just don't end up getting traction within those communities. So most of the people that make it to trafficking designation are Caucasian kids born in your neighborhood. LGBTQ, children and teenagers, are at an extremely high risk because of the shame and closeting and some of the disconnect, and also because, as I said before, there's a monetization that becomes involved with it. I don't want to be too graphic with this or sensational, but if a boy is used to acting in feminine ways, they don't have to train him. That's how these people think. If they can shame somebody, if they can hold a secret over somebody, that's collateral they can hold over. So they'll find a 13-year-old boy on a chat room he shouldn't be on, and they'll groom him. And they'll kidnap him, and they'll break him down sexually and with violence and manipulation. And then they'll put him on the street, or they'll put him on the internet. Wherever there is addiction, poverty, or mental health issues, these people look at who can I have access to with the least amount of effort. And if they see, there's a dad, there's a mom, and they appear to be involved. I heard a story of a predator say one time, he got a job at a skating rink so he could have access to kids. And he was taking pictures, acting like he was just, taking pictures of the events. This is in the days of old school cameras, not phones. And one mom came up to him and said, "I want to see your negatives." And he backed away from that family like he was running from a forest fire. Because she had eyes to see. He wanted to get with the families that are disconnected, the families where there's mom has 3 jobs and dad's nowhere to be found, there's an addiction. Where won't I be found out? Where can I have the easy stacks? You see where you got a job at. Churches are a place where people target. Jobs surrounding kids, a place people target. This is part of developing our eyes to see. Because the person who looks like, a great guy who's really great with the kids, or a great girl who's really great with the kids, can also be somebody who's just trying to gain access to the church. Non-English speaking families. I'll talk about this for a second. And undocumented families. One thing, or if you prefer, people that came here through illegal means, are at risk because the collateral is, you'll do whatever I say, or I'll call us. You want your dad to be able to stay here? You want your mom to go back to Guatemala? It's instant leverage. So these kids are at risk. places to look at that you pass it. Massage parlors, strip clubs, nail salons. I'll give you an example. Upper Darby, Pennsylvania, where I'm from originally, that area. There was a nail salon, and everybody walked in and out all the time during the school year and saw a 12-year-old girl working. And she was Asian. And no one, for whatever reason, thought to ask, why is this kid not in school? It just didn't occur to anyone. She was being trafficked for work labor during the day, working till 2 a.m. in a hotel, finding sex with people that wanted to have sex with each other. And until one person walked in and said, "Why is she here?" She was in horrible slavery with people walking by every second. Major porn search engines. Pornhub. And I know none of my good Baptist friends know about this place, so I'll explain it to you. Pornhub is one of the major porn search engines in the world. And they try to promote themselves as if they're a, wink, wink, funny little thing that provides a harmless service. Pornhub is a place where people access child pornography and human trafficking every day. Pornhub got sued for having child pornography on their site. They deleted, after being sued, they didn't do it right away. They didn't do it out of a moral obligation. After they were sued and it looked like they were losing, they deleted millions, not 20, not thousands, millions of videos of children being sexually assaulted. Millions. What they didn't do, they didn't get rid of videos of unconscious people being sexually assaulted. They came to them later and say, "I really was unconscious. This was not a video made to look like that. That was real." They refused to take that content. Human trafficking victims that were forced to produce pornography, like the girl I mentioned to you earlier that committed suicide, have gone to Pornhub and are right now in a class action lawsuit against them. They refuse to take the content. It's that easy to access. And there are institutions, spirits and principalities, that refuse to do anything with this but monetize it. That's why Pornhub won't take this down. They don't care about money. They care about money. Advertisement websites, Craigslist, Backpage. Craigslist did a good thing. They said, "We know we have a problem. We want to do the right thing." So they let the FBI in like it was an FBI convention. And they busted a lot of people for trying to both sell children and purchase children. And they did a good thing. God bless them. Backpage did not do that good thing. They were like Pornhub. They wanted to monetize it. And eventually Backpage was taken down. They had people doing jaw and facial recognition to see what the estimated age of prostitutes, escorts being shown on their site was. And they saw as young as 8 or 10. So that site is no more. Because, think about that. If you found out that your business in some way intersected with this, I wouldn't sleep until there was something rectified. I don't think I would sleep then. These companies are more concerned with the fact that they can make an exceedingly large amount of money off the backs of these people suffering, our children suffering. Front businesses. We're going to get into this later, but I'll tell you this now and then show you the photos later. There was a daycare in Collindale, Pennsylvania, also where I'm from. And the guy that ended up being arrested, the media dubbed him Satan. He had pornographic videos that he was selling of children as young as 6 months. This is horrible and I'm sorry. And this is why we need to also remember our God and to also be in fellowship there. He had 2 women running a daycare that were knowingly his baby. That's how he gained access. They never had to see him. They saw these 2 women that looked like local housewives that were doing a nice thing. Wow, how can they afford to do it that cheaply? Because they're making money elsewhere. So we're also going to look at a rehab. There are a million different ways somebody can try to gain access and utilize a system you didn't anticipate. All right, these are 25 different unique types of trafficking. I'm not going to go through all of them with you. I will tell you that some of the more frequent things that you will see is massage non-therapeutic or massage therapeutic, escort services, uniformly are involved in trafficking, in my experience. If there's an agency that exists out there where somebody can just purchase a date for a high-pollutant function, I've never seen it. And that exists back when they had yellow pages. They're right in the yellow pages. But there are a million different front organizations for things like this, or titles, to make you think it's a legitimate business. How are children groomed? Sometimes it's the family themselves. So we talked about abuse. When a kid has been abused, when a kid has suffered trauma or dysfunction in their lives, traffickers try to find that kid. So how can I find that kid? I heard a pimp talk about how he would go to a mall and he would see the kid that looked at Christ. That's where he was. Now today, going on an internet chat room and saying, you know, your parents don't understand you, my parents don't understand you. Let's talk. However they can gain access. But oftentimes, a parent, an uncle, and aunt will be the first trafficker. I have seen kids that told me their parents are the first person that shot them up with heroin, the person that made money off them so that they could support their drug habit. I had a woman who is now in her 50s, Carol, who worked in Westchester, Pennsylvania, and her mom started trafficking her when she was 7. Carol is now sober and is now a peer specialist, working with people who struggle. That's Carol's story. That's how she was grown. We're going to talk a little bit later about why it's hard to get people out of these situations. And part of Carol's story was, I couldn't trust systems because the men that came to solicit sex from me when I was 8 were teachers, were police officers, were guys in the neighborhood that people looked up at, that looked down at me and my mom when they were passing me on the street. So in her mind, now is that everybody? Are there good police? Are there good teachers? Are there good? Absolutely. But none of that was Carol's experience. So in her mind, everybody's in on it. You can't trust anyone. That's part of the grooming. It's making the person's mentality. This is my life. This is my life. And there is no pretend. There's no one to trust. And there's no way. That's part of the grooming process. The internet has made grooming easy, and we alluded to this. I don't have to meet you. You don't have to know that this person is a 65-year-old or a 25-year-old. They can pretend to be a 15-year-old girl. And you will never know because you have the ability to utilize the internet for that purpose. So where before someone had to gain access to, that barrier has been removed. So it's only made this process easier. There are two kinds of general pimp trafficker approaches. And one is called the Romeo. And sometimes a pimp will use a third party that's their Romeo. So a 15-year-old girl will meet a boy or will meet a girl and believe that they're in love with this person or they're friends with this person. And they will create a rapport with the purpose in mind of getting this person into a trafficking situation. They're big. And they were trafficked themselves. And now this is how they gain favor with the person who's trafficked. You know, big girl, you did good. Brought me free this week. Yeah. That's how it works. So law enforcement, schools, churches, you don't see the big bad man. You see another kid. It's an easy way to gain access. And the person thinks they're in a relationship. So part of the difficulty in getting out of it is they actually did love me. I felt loved from them. I didn't feel loved from my father who beat me. I didn't feel loved from my mother who abused me. Or I did feel loved from my parents. But how could they ever accept me after this? Not because the parents put that out, but because that's what's been instilled in them. You're different. Guerrilla pimp is all about violence and abuse. It's all about fear. That's another tactic. The things I was alluding to earlier about what about little brother, what about parents. That's a guerrilla pimp's tactic. Most traffickers and pimp trafficker interchange. They're a person that uses coercion, manipulation, and deceit to put someone into a position where they're a slave, they're a sexual slave. They're being manipulated so that they can be monetized. Most trafficker pimps, these approaches are interchangeable. You switch them up based on what you think the person requires to be kept. Time. Yeah. So traffickers use a variety, again, of different ways of approaching. Drug addiction is a huge one. Physical violence, psychological abuse, holding of passports, holding of money, finances, debt bondage. There are people that don't realize that they're being trafficked. They think they're paying off a debt. That can be a debt to a drug dealer. That can be a debt. You paid my parents' rent, so we weren't homeless. They're slavery. They're in slavery. But their mindset is, you know, I got myself in this position and I have to do that. That is human trafficking. There is no other definition. But often that's not how it's viewed by the person. I have yet to meet a person that ran up to me and said, I am a victim of human trafficking, please help me. But I've met a lot of people that have been trafficked that needed help in understanding what was happening and that they had options. Psychological control. We've talked about rape. We've talked about pornography. There are two ways pornography is used. One is making porn of the person and having that be blackmail. The other is they will use pornography as a training tool to teach these kids how to do the things that are being asked of them. And I've heard traffic victims talk about how hurtful and harmful that was to them. And how later on, when they got out and they were in a relationship and they realized that their partner used pornography, how devastating it was. But pornography and the trafficking industry are intertwined in many, many ways. Rule books. I have seen no books filled with rules. They're forced to write down the rules and then live by the rules, or else. And or else can be a whole range of horrible things. But some of the rules are so, it's like somebody that's in a prison. You know, you take on that mentality. There's one rule that's called reckless eyeballing. This is part of the old pimp rules. You can actually look up the old pimp rules online. If you look somebody in the eyes, you're getting hurt tonight. You don't look people in the eyes. What are you looking at them for? Go to the apartment. These people have to live by these rules. And it becomes their only safety. It's the thing of legalism on steroids. If you don't live by the rules, you're going to be abused. You're going to be harmed. But the better you do with the rules, the better I'm going to treat you, baby. So you create obedience and a shifting ground of where your value and your safety come. Tattooing and branding. I met two girls actually. They both had tattoos that said God in their tattoo. I was working at Children and Youth Services. I was a drug and alcohol assessor. Both these women had kids. And I'm a good Christian. I see God and I'm like, praise the Lord. Let's talk about it. And they looked at me like I was a purple-headed elephant. God's princess, God's angel. I found out later was a brand. The pimp made the girls call him God. So God's princess, God's angel, God's soldier, God's baby girl. It was him identifying to them, you're mine, your property, and identifying to other pimps. You're going to have problems with me if you try to take her from my stable. I was telling Pastor Barry earlier, I was in a Wawa earlier today, and I saw, again, this was closer to Allentown, and I saw a girl, very revealing dress, amazing eyelashes, amazing nails, and the most bizarre tattoos, one on her neck and one on her arm. And they looked the same, looked like the same tattoo. But you couldn't make out what it was. And she was amazing nails, amazing eyelashes. Her cosmetics cost a lot of money, you could tell. She was using a welfare. Now, if she was a kid, I would have called the police immediately. She was probably in her 20s. I couldn't engage her. I didn't have the time. And there were people around her. There was no way for me to make rapport. But I believe she was a slave. I believe she was in somebody's stable. And the bottom B, and we're not going to say that nasty word. The bottom B works like this. We talked about the hierarchy, the rigid rules of the state. One person will kind of graduate to be the junior trafficker. And they will be an informant, or many can be thinking they're in charge and they're informing on each other. But one can actually be used to create some reviews. We already talked about them being used to bring people into trafficking, to manipulate them, into being trafficking victims. Harming people, giving them over to be abused or killed. Imagine trying to get out of that lifestyle, to make a lifestyle change. Lifestyle is a horrible word to use. Imagine trying to get free from slavery. You have that guilt and that shame for what things you have done in the context of an evil satanic system that you were trying to navigate to survive. These are some of the psychological weapons a trafficker will use, so that when it comes time to leave, when there's hope, wow, I trust Pastor Barrett, trust Pastor Rich. But you don't know what I've done. How can I go back? Who would have me? I'm as guilty as they are. It's how it's viewed. But that perception was created to keep them in bondage. And the lie is that you can't be released. Resistance to freedom, fear of retaliation. Another thing I'll say to you. Some trafficking victims are the hardest people to work with. Initially, there's a lot of resistance with some. With others, there's not a lot of resistance up front, but they jump, they leap. You know, you get them all the way to the finish line, and they roll. Some of that is because they're afraid of what will happen to other people. Some of that is because they really do their pimp like God, and they're afraid that they will be harmed. You know, he'll find me I know you say you're going to send me to this safe place in Wisconsin. He'll find me. Or she'll find me. There's magical powers attributed to the traffic. Justified distrust of law enforcement, social services, based on people that have solicited sex from them in the past or abused them in the past. Feelings of attachment or loyalty to the trafficker fostered by manipulation and trauma. And I'll add one to this that should be there. I leave. What's he going to do to the rest of the state? He's going to take it out on them. And who's going to be there to look out for the 14-year-old kid there? I was looking out for them. Now they got nobody to help them learn how to live with this. So sometimes even the person that's being very resistant with us, I mean downright ignorant to us, or that keeps leaving, the second we get them to the goal line, in their world it makes sense. And part of us engaging with them is trying to help figure out what drives them to resist us and to go back. Not to judge it, but to try to love them through and not give them resistance. But just stay that presence until they're ready, even if it's the 5th time we've done this. Having eyes to see. We talked about some of the telltale signs. History of 4 or more runaways. Telltale sign. That's a red flag. I would say, honestly, if you see this more than once, but if you see it 4 times, yeah, you're probably looking at something more. Children who look disheveled or have clothing that is too expensive or sexualized. So if you see a kid who's walking around that looks unkept, or if you see a kid like the woman I mentioned earlier, she's using a welfare card, but she's got amazing nails, tattoos, eyelashes. It doesn't look, it looks out of place. Branding tattoos, spotting children in out-of-place situations, not at school, in adult settings, controlling parents or friends. I'm always suspect when somebody doesn't want me to be able to talk to somebody without their presence, when they really want to interject themselves. And they could look like a gorilla pimp, like, I need to be here. Or they could look like a Romeo pimp. I just want to be here to support her. She's my baby girl. You know? Or I just need to support her. You know, she's just a good person and I just want to be here to help. I can talk to her myself. That's okay. And if they're a child, well, let's get a third person. Let's get their parent. How about their parent? Or if it's a parent, how about law enforcement? How about CYS? When you see a controlling person that doesn't want to allow you access to a kid that's asking for your help, as a pastor, as a guidance counselor, it's a flag. Look for it. Multiple phones, multiple social media accounts, email accounts, avoidance of institutions or social connections, possible eye contact avoidance, or unnecessary aggression towards authority. These are when you see smoke, there's fire. These are some of the things you see on average with trafficking. What do traffickers and pimps look like? These are all human traffickers. The person in the upper left-hand corner was running that daycare I was telling you about that was sexually abusing 6-month-olds. She lived in the neighborhood her whole life. We thought she was good people. I knew her brother, went to school with her. It's not the enemy other. Sometimes it is. But often, more often than not, it's someone that has built a familiarity in the community, or familiarity enough to have some level of independent group. The guy on the right was a psychiatrist. He was working at Longview Hospital in Longview, Texas. So this man is both a psychiatrist and a Texan. And I know what that means to Pastor Barry. This is not the person that screams, "Be afraid of me." This guy had a professional reputation. But he was using the knowledge he gained about his psychiatric clients to manipulate them into trafficking so that he could monetize them. And he was working in collaboration with pimps and traffickers. I think the lady on our left needs no introduction. She worked with Jeffrey Epstein. If I saw that woman, I would think, at an interview, I would say hire her immediately. She looks high functioning, she looks a little type A, and she'll probably do a great job for us in the organization. She was trafficking children. If you look at the bottom right picture, it looks like some celebration of racial unity. It is every country, color, and creed. They were all human traffickers that all got busted at the same state. So don't, if you have a lens that only looks for a demographic, it's an old paradigm. I'm not saying anybody's bad for that. But if we're looking for the person we saw in the movies, or the person that we think would act or look this way, look at behaviors, not at demographics. Feel your gut. Pay attention to things that aren't consistent. And don't write them off and say, well, I'm terrible for thinking that about food. Maybe that's the Holy Spirit speaking. Maybe it's your own intuition telling you something's wrong. Pay mind to it. It's not a demographic. The people on this list, in particular to me, the psychiatrist and the girl who I went to high school with, her brother, fit into no paradigm I would look for. But maybe, just maybe, if I paid attention, I didn't have access to this woman at all. But maybe when I do have interactions with these people, if I put aside the image of the 1970s movie Pimp, and I look for the person as they are, how do they move with people? How do they move with kids? How does this relationship make sense? Then maybe I'll catch it. Below is a list of local traffickers that got arrested in Lehigh County. So these are people here. These are cases here. And what I was taught, whenever you see something that makes it to the level of arrest, you are seeing the tip top of the iceberg. You're not even seeing a quarter of the iceberg above water, let alone what's underneath it. This is here. There is case law in this area. Where I'm from in Chester County, Pennsylvania, there were multiple sites in a month. I think they got 4 different massage parlors. It's right there. And that's just the massage parlors. They were focusing on an aspect. This number is a national human trafficking hotline. You can call it, and I want to remove some magical thinking about this. When you call a hotline like this, you are not making a mistake that can destroy someone's life. You know, the magic thinking is, the second I call this, what if I destroy Donna's whole life because I was wrong? You can talk to these people about what you're seeing, and they can then feed back to you. Well, that doesn't seem pertinent. You know, the fact that they're, a Calvinist and not into Weston, or vice versa. That doesn't seem to really apply. When I saw this tattoo on it, oh yeah, we've heard about that tattoo. That means a lot to us. And you can spitball. That's okay. And that might end up with you saving him lives. I've been able to be a part of getting several people connected to services that either did or didn't receive them, or getting people out. And I'm not special. I was born and bred in Delaware County, Pennsylvania. Can any good thing come from Delaware County? All of us, if we have eyes to see this and have resources to report it, can be part of saving somebody. Now, that is not prevention, that's intervention. All of us can do that. I'm going to talk about prevention in a moment. One resource I want to make you aware of, I'm the education person for Aspire to the Town. Volunteer position, I do their trainings here. Aspire is very far from here. They're on 3rd Street in Easton. They have a house for women that have been removed from trafficking situations. So other ways we can help in intervention, there are volunteer opportunities, there are things that they need, resources for women, and some things they do with women that they encounter just in the street. If a person's been, you age out of certain systems, where eventually you end up on a street corner or work in a hotel, where you may have started as an escort at a phone or on the internet. Women that are working the hotels just having socks. When's the last time you changed your socks? When's the last time you changed your underwear? The person expects you to work every day. You're living in a hotel. That's a way to get someone just to talk to or to be grateful when they get into the safe house. Is there any, you don't have like a resume? You know, there are volunteer things we can do to help. This is all, again, intervention. So I encourage all of you to engage with Aspire. They're a great organization that's doing some great work in here. Another name that you should know is Polaris Project. They do this internationally, and they have some amazing resources. That's not on this slide. But it's one that jot down. They have a great amount of knowledge in this area. There are videos, and that's the end of our slides. But there's a couple more resources I want to mention before I sprint upstairs like I'm an Olympian. There are videos that you can watch that are specifically geared for children to learn how to be equipped against this. This is prevention. So I think the one is called Little Red, and they use Little Red Riding Hood to help educate kids on how they bound it. What's good, what's bad. You know, it's just a way to build that mindset. It's a great resource. Fight the New Drug is a website. Look it up. They have 3 free videos that break down. The first one talks about the effects of pornography on the brain. The second one talks about the interrelationship between pornography and human trafficking. And you hear free trafficking victims talk about their experience and how they were put on porn and how pornography was part of their indoctrination. And the last one is the effect of pornography on families. So great resource, and that's coming at it from what drives the industry, the consumer. And you see how, I'm not saying everyone that watches pornography will end up having sex with a child or end up looking for someone to have sex with that's in slavery, but I guarantee you, if you did a test of everyone that ended up going to jail because they were having sex with children, or because they had had sex with a slave, or because they had taken illegal videos or raped someone while they were passed out, more often than not, you're going to see pornography present. It changes our brains in a way that affects everybody. That might only manifest in one person as, I feel distant from my wife, and we just don't seem to connect it. It might manifest in someone else as they go down the rabbit hole. Those are some really good resources. Again, I would just say to you, if you have any questions, pass them on to Barry. I'm happy to come back or to do a Zoom, answer any questions you have, or forward answers to Barry as a conduit. But I will do this anywhere. If you tell me to meet you in a Wawa parking lot at 3 a.m., you have a group of people who want to hear about this, I want to be there. And I'm going to leave the pastor. Barry, would you mind praying us out?
Yeah. Oh gosh. Rich, this is fantastic. God bless you.
Thank you
God
so
bless
much.
you too. Thank you for being here, doing this work. I don't know what you guys do, but that's awesome. More than 30 minutes with you and your friend and said, I have ever heard of this subject. This is great. One question. The hotline is probably our go-to if we were to notice something.
Well, I'll tell you, there are two different things. You can go to the hotline. You can call Aspire directly. Okay. So there are two different conduits. If you decide to go to law enforcement, do not go to local law enforcement. Go to the federal level, or go to the what can I think of the name? Go to the federal level. But the easiest call for you to make is the hotline number, or call Aspire, or call me, because I'm working with it.
Could you show one more time the hotline number?
Absolutely. If you need to get back, I can do that.
Oh, thank you. And I'm going to let you guys go. Thank you so much for listening, and God bless you.
How are you going to